Okay, let us start. Good afternoon. In this second panel session, here we are talking about value creation methodologies with three very interesting speakers. I will introduce you the speakers shortly. Maybe a little story from my side. I'm in my city here. I am a board member of a social enterprise with care and social care, and which means impact on society is the core business. And we ask the audits for the accounting things, for the financial accounting, to make a report also on social impact, because this is the core business. And they did not know how to do this. So you can imagine that we were quite disappointing, and that's why I'm very happy that we have you in this panel, because you will open the eyes and bring light in the tunnel of reporting. I think also not only measurement and management, also reporting. So it's my honor to moderate this session. For the new people who are new, my name is Ivo Matza. I'm the CEO of ABIS, the Academy of Business in Society. I will introduce first you all three. We have three panelists. We have very interesting profile. We have William Everson. He's an economist focused on integrating natural and social capital. And I would say this is for economists quite a niche domain. Welcome, Will, in this session, and we are really looking forward to your insights. We have Adrian de Goede-Ruijs, also living in the Netherlands, by the way. He is the executive director of Impact Institute and co-founder of True Price. Interesting thing with his profile is that he was also a professor in finance, and his PhD was focused on the behavioral game theory. And welcome, Adrian, to this session. And we have Maarten Dubois. He is at Ernst & Young, Director for Climate Change and Sustainability, and he is specialist in environmental specialist in oil and gas, and he has lots of experience in all the business domains like modeling, strategy, etc. So what's really interesting in the panelists here, welcome Maarten, is that we have interdisciplinary profiles here in the panel. All three are interdisciplinary, and this is really nice to have you in this panel, because we are educated more or less in this, at least most of us, in the monodisciplinary approach, which makes his life very difficult to understand more than only what you see. And you will be very helpful to have more broader perspective and bring ourselves and our participants in a much higher level with your insights. So welcome again. And I would like to give William first the floor, the virtual floor, sharing his insight for total impact measurement and management. So we are very curious, and maybe you can start your sharing your thoughts.
Absolutely, thank you, Ivo. So I'll say a little bit about total impact measurement and management, which is a framework that and set of methodologies that we developed at PwC quite a number of years ago now. About a decade ago, we started working with this in earnest with organizations, including lots of companies. I'll say a bit about that. I'll say then a little bit about what I think the fundamentals are, because there's a lot of similarity between methodologies in this sphere, and for those who were listening to the previous panel, there's a great deal of similarity in the conceptual framing that supports this whole space. I thought a very interesting and intellectually stimulating panel, the one before this. And then I'll just say a bit about how using I think the right kind of methodologies, but really pursuing the logic that underpins those methodologies can open up opportunities for what we talk about as sustainable value creation. So 3 avenues to that. So total impact measurement and management first. The choice of words here is very intentional. So I'll just go through them in quickly in order. Total, we think about all the material impacts on environment and society, and that may be of a business or of a project, an investment, really pretty much anything. Impact, critically, we like to think about impact rather than what are frequently measured and reported in lots of corporate and other organizational environmental and social reporting, which is it's very often the case that they measure inputs and outputs, whereas impacts are the actual changes in the world, the actual changes that affect the environment and affect individuals and society. Measurement, because we think that I should say which methodology I'm aware of. I know I can't vote. I'm aware of them all, and they're excellent, all of them. Measurement is a key component of this for us. I think the previous panel touched on this only very lightly, but actually we believe in evidence-based sustainability strategy, evidence-based consulting in general. And crucially, we think that big business decisions, significant business decisions, should be based on evidence wherever that's available. We do think, in terms of a phrase we use a lot, is enough precision for the decision. So not always taking measurement to the nth degree, but actually trying to have an evidence base. And management, the last word in Tim, because measurement is a means to an end, and never really an end in itself. And that end is better strategic decisions, it's better strategy, it's better day-to-day decision making. And that in our mind is decision making that takes into account and wherever possible optimizes impacts on society and the environment. So those are the words in total impact measurement and management and what they mean to us. Briefly, systems thinking, because Wayne talked about this in the previous panel, and I think it's hugely important. I think historically there's been a challenge, particularly in corporate environmental management, that genuine environmental and more broadly social constraints haven't been well defined. And we see now with the planetary boundaries framework, with various efforts to be more descriptive about localized environmental limits, that there is a body of scientific evidence emerging that businesses can refer to directly. And I think that is extremely powerful and something we try to now integrate whenever we do TIM assessments. Now, previously it's been left for governments and for governance generally to define what the constraints on business are. And I think it's a huge help that there is now an evidence base that empowers businesses to do that for themselves to a greater extent. So the last thing I said I'd describe in my 5 minutes, which I'm fast approaching, I think this opens up 3 fundamental routes to sustainable value creation. And the first is simple. It's having lower negative impacts than your peer organizations. And I would sort of go against the crowd slightly, perhaps, by saying that being less bad isn't a bad thing. Actually, being less bad is absolutely critical and fundamental to our survival as a human society. So, yeah, doing good is a great aspiration, but being less bad on the environment can bring us within planetary boundaries, and is a realistic aspiration for most organizations. The second way that it can create value is by finding ways to capture positive impacts, positive societal impacts that aren't currently rewarded. Now, what I mean by that is really positive externalities that you are creating as an organization you don't get paid for. And good examples of this, I think, in things like mass online courses, which couldn't historically be a business model in their own right, but with new technology are creating huge business for edtech. So there are lots of other niche examples of that. And then perhaps the most exciting way to create value with this new information on social and environmental impacts, it's about targeting the negative impacts of other sectors, other organizations as business opportunities. And this is the source, actually, of some of the biggest business opportunities of our current day. So you think about what electric vehicle manufacturers are targeting, what Tesla are targeting is the enormous externality caused by conventional automotive vehicles, the enormous contribution to climate change. Actually, automated vehicles are in a sense targeting the enormous impact of road traffic accidents. But the same extends to many other sectors as well. So precision agriculture, for example, is targeting the fact that some chemical agriculture has significant negative side effects. And if they can figure out how to do that at a price competitive level, that's an enormous opportunity. Mm. So 3 routes to value creation based on a solid set of methodologies. That's where I'll leave my contribution.
Thank you, Will. Maybe one question before we proceed to Adrian. You did many projects in many industries, and I read also in 20 countries. Mm. We have a very international audience at the moment from participants all over the world. So maybe a brief comment. Do you have experience in the diversity of countries? Do you see another approach? Just briefly, please.
I think that, there are a great diversity of approaches around the world. And we often, what I would say is we've found resonance for a straightforward conceptual framework based on, societal value on the one hand, meaning both affected by impacts on the environment and society and all stakeholders. So societal value on the one hand, and how to turn that into business value on the other. We've seen resonance for that basic approach wherever we've worked in the world.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Adrian. Let's proceed with you. I thought also that you are also one of the co-founders of the SDG Charity Charter Foundation in the Netherlands to promote SDGs in the Netherlands. I think you brought a case also. So you have 2 slides, and I will share your slide. Okay?
Sure. So, if I will start with a bit of my original motivation. So you'll have to be a little bit patient with me. So I started to venture into sustainability when I was 14. So with a couple of friends, we made a wave motion power generator, so a machine to get electricity out of waves. Because we saw that all the existing machines do that went, the waves destroyed them. And we got seed funding from banks. We were on the World Expo. We won lots of European prizes. So we thought we solved the problem. And then we stumbled upon a problem that we showed it everywhere, so we couldn't get a patent. We were bad entrepreneurs at 15. But most importantly, there was no business case for it. And I thought, that is stupid. We have an idea that solves a societal problem. Probably didn't, but in our idea it did. but it doesn't work. So I didn't become an engineer. I became an econometrician, did my PhD, and then I stumbled upon the concept of externalities. And I thought, this is the solution. And the reason why our machine didn't work is that the externalities of carbon, of all the unsustainable things, are not internalized into the market. So the life mission of myself and one of my best friends was to bring externalities to the masses. And that's why we founded True Price. We have, for example, a store in Amsterdam where consumers can actually buy products, pay a true price, and that money goes to taking carbon out of the air, paying a living income to farmers. So that was...
Adrian, could you define true price?
Yes, that is the market price that you pay, plus the unpaid social and environmental costs like carbon, water, but also underpayment, gender, labor, forced labor, etc. And so that is the external costs that are not priced in. And we think that if you can manage to price them in, you can solve 95 of the SDGs, of the sustainability problems. But then we noticed that for companies, they thought in a different way. They don't think in terms of pricing, they think in terms of value creation, profit and loss. And we also saw that, well, often the idea is very old, but the framing is very important. And if you looked at the Puma EP&L, to which Will and his colleagues contributed to, that was a stroke of genius because it brought a framing part, the idea of an environmental profit and loss to business leaders. So then you had a way in which business leaders understood externalities. So based on that, we expanded our view and we came to the vision of the impact economy. So our vision is that we should work towards an impact economy where work, technology, and entrepreneurship don't work to accumulate capital, but to engender a better world. And we think that means that companies need to take impact as serious as their profits. So that also means to measure, report, and manage them as seriously as their profits. So we call what we see as impact statements. So in addition to their financial statements, all business should also publish and steer on their impact statements, which provide a quantified and monetized and standardized overview of their value creation. Well, for a long time that was fanciful, but now not that much. As you also know, the Harvard Business School study, they said, well, the missing link to an impact economy is accounts that integrate impact. And that already 56 companies have in the public domain experimented with that. So and also last year, our open source framework for impact statement received an award from the United Nations Commission on Trade and Development. So the centerpiece, and that is what you see, is the integrated profit and loss. So that starts by recognizing that there has been centuries of thoughts into how do we account for financial profit. And so that has been developed through a long amount of time. So we think, well, let's use that machinery with more fundamental economics to come with a solution. So if you take a normal P&L, it shows the value created for one stakeholder, the shareholders, on one capital, financial capital. So we thought, let's expand that in two ways. First, not only focus on one capital, but focus on all the capitals, manufactured capital, intellectual capital, natural capital, social capital, human capital, and the 6 capitals defined by the IRC. And even if you're only interested in profit, 50 to 80% of the market capitalization of listed companies is not on the book value. So is in these non-financial capitals that we currently don't measure. So very important, even for investors. And second, quantify not only the value for investors, but for all the material stakeholders of the company, their employees, their clients, the clients of the clients, governments, etc. So, and then at first we were very happy because we could measure the value for all the capitals on all the stakeholders. But then we know the problem that you cannot manage on that. Now, on the one hand, you cannot manage a company with hundreds of indicators. Second, so that's not an option. Second, you cannot add them all up to one number, because then it can be that you go bankrupt. You create lots of value for your clients, but you go bankrupt. But also it can be that you create positive value for your shareholders, 200 million, but you destroy rainforest and create child labor and forced labor. And then you say, well, net, we have a positive value. So you cannot add everything up. And so we took one step back and said, if you look at a normal financial statement, you have one statement for each of the things that you measure. You have a P&L statement for your profit, you have a balance sheet statement for your balance position, and you have a cash flow statement for your cash flow. So similarly, we identified you have to have the societal goals that you have as a company and have a statement for each of that based on the profit and loss. So that's investor value creation statement, measuring the long-term value for investors, is the value creation statement for your stakeholders. It is an external cost statement, do no harm, and it is an SDG statement. So measuring the value created on the SDGs. So that is the kind of the theoretical framework. And then if we can go to the next slide to show two examples. So we work mostly in sectors with big externalities, positive and negative, the food and ag, energy, but also the financial sector. So on the left-hand side, you see a case from ABN AMRO, that's a large bank in the Netherlands. And with them, we've been working for a couple of years. And last year, they published that first bank worldwide, their integrated profit and loss. And this year, interestingly, because last year they had a separated impact report, and this year they included it in their integrated report with a limited assurance from EY, their auditor. And here you see, for example, on the left bottom, the positive and negative value they create on the SDGs. So there are 3 focus SDGs, 8, 12, and 13. And then in the middle, you see the value they create per stakeholder and capital. And what's interesting to see is that most of the value that they create is actually not in financial capital, but is in manufactured capital. So through the service they provide. And that overall they create quite a lot of positive value, but there's also negative value creation, in particular in social and natural capital. So their route was to take a very solid measurement and reporting approach and use that as the basis for steering. On the right-hand side, a different case of DBS, so the largest bank in Southeast Asia, and they focus less on reporting and more on how do we steer our portfolio, in particular corporate lending portfolio. So they focus on the sectors where they can make a difference. For example, what is the impact of lending to sustainable palm oil companies versus the sector average? Or what is the impact of lending to electrical vehicle car manufacturers versus combustion engine car manufacturers? Because they have that real trade-off that they have to make, and the question is, what is the value to society of that? So summarizing, we have kind of a long-term vision, creating an impact economy, but we believe that already now companies can make a difference by measuring and managing and reporting on their impact in this way. Thank you.
Adrian, thank you very much. It's really insightful, and the cases are very specific and concrete. That's really nice. Thank you very much. I will stop sharing now. And let's continue with Maarten. Adrian also already mentioned EY, so you are EY director in the climate change and sustainability, and I would like to give the floor to you to talk about long-term value. And do I have to show the slides immediately?
Yep,
yes,
that would be good. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, thanks, Ivo, and well, thanks also Adrian and Will. Actually, I'll be building on both the presentations that you've given. These are very interesting slides. Here we go. And so
right to the next one, right?
Yeah, indeed. So let me first explain what I'll be discussing. I'll be focusing on long-term value, which is the framework that EY uses to look at market value. And if you're going to look at the methodology, the first question is, what are we going to investigate? Or what is the market value of a company? And I think the picture on the right, the diagram on the right, illustrates what Adrian already said. If you look at what's in the books, the financials, that's the tangible book value. That's kind of a small part of the overall value of a company. Then you've got the intangible book value. It's still registered in the books. And then there's everything which is intangible value, but not measured nor communicated. Just think about a company. Think about a small company, a startup. Well, the revenues are almost zero at that point, and still startups can be very valuable and very highly valued by market, by investors, because there's a belief in the potential to grow. Similarly, if you would look at major companies are not just the profits of last year. It's everything that hangs around the company. It's about the people. It's about the brands. It's about the credibility with suppliers. So everything turns around intangibles. Clearly, financials are important, but if you want to assess the value in the future, because that's what investors are interested in, the future, not so much what happened in the past, but it's the past that has built the intangible assets. And trust is in there, very important. So you see on the right-hand side is first the current perspective where there's a lot of gray, and we focus on tangible things. On the right-hand side, you see what should be the real market value or the real measurement of market value. And that's also where you see the yellow part coming in, the intangible value, the reliably measured and communicated value related to intangibles, focusing on everything related, which is related to trust. Sustainability is a part into it, but also customer aspects are important, and certainly everything which is related to staff. Can we go to the next slide, Ivo? Maybe I'll go into the methodology in a second, but first the question is, why do we actually want to measure more accurately? If you've got value, well, first, investors are interested in this because that's what investors are deciding, making their business case on. So clearly, if you can showcase that your company is creating a lot of value, just beyond what you've got measured, you will have a better value for investors. There's a second reason to really focus on metrics and to focus on the value that your company creates beyond the financials. And that is about control and management control. Think about what ISO 9001 and all these other management systems are already saying for years. If you want to control, if you want to create focus in your company, you need to measure. That's what KPIs are about. So once you understand how you create value, it's way easier to understand where you have to drive your value creation. And so by making intangibles tangible, that's where you actually make the shift and where you create management control to actually create more value and more externalities, as Adrian said, for society. Okay, let's focus a bit on the long-term value framework that EY puts forward. And so there are the financials, very clear, but I would say the indicators and the metrics are kind of mature on this. So the question is, which kind of metrics would be well positioned to better assess value? And we've got three major types of metrics that we put forward. It's about consumers. How much trust have consumers in the brand that's put forward? How much innovation can you bring to the market towards your consumers? And what's the brand loyalty? Consumers that are already clients of yours, how often do they stay loyal to you? But there's a set of metrics that exists around this topic. Human value, so what do you bring as a company to the society related to your workers? Really well-being, retention, diversity, metrics that help around these topics really help to bring in the assets that you've got on the human aspect. And finally, the societal value that you create, everything related to climate change, safety, ethics, etc. There are many different sets of indicators that can be used to actually measure how well you're performing on these aspects. Well, our framework, how do we look or how do we try to determine? Because every company is different. At the same time, metrics would be nice if metrics can be compared between companies or at least between sectors. So the long-term value framework recommends a four-step process to establish company-specific metrics. The first is about mapping the overall context and how the company is positioned itself in the overall context. The context strategy What's the purpose of what is the purpose of a company and the governance. The second step is really about assessing the stakeholders, who is material to us, and how do our stakeholders assess value. What is for them, what is value? The third part is about our strategic capabilities, about the company. What do you need to actually generate value that meets with what stakeholders estimate that value is? And it's also about really establishing how can we protect the brand, where is our business model, etc. And then the fourth step is really about developing the metrics. On the one hand, the metrics that measure the value assessed or at least felt by our stakeholders. And secondly, the strength of our strategic assets to generate the necessary value. Well, I think that's about our methodology to look at value of different companies. A lot is standardized in the sense that it's a four-step approach. It's standardized. A lot of, I would say, knowledge sharing is happening. A lot of the metrics will be similar to different companies. But at the same time, it's about customization. For example, SDGs. If you look at the societal value, the SDGs that are material to every company, that are the priority, that fit best into the purpose of each company, will be different from one company to another company. But there will be a lot of customization, which means that there will be some diversity and also some personification of what comes out and which metrics are key or material for that company. I would like to keep it here for the introduction.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you very much. This is also very, very insightful and also very concrete. I have another poll. Oh, I didn't see the poll. We do the poll later. I have a question. First, let's start with the same question to all three of you. It looks like methodologies in managing and measurement is to make it tangible, to get some evidence. I can imagine that this also asks a lot from your clients. They have their traditional, or they had their traditional reporting systems, etc. So this question has two sides. First, what kind of challenges does your clients face? And second, how do you guide? How do you help or support them to get in this flow of more value-driven methodologies? Will, could you start?
Absolutely, yeah. I think I think you're right that it can be, or can look and seem somewhat onerous for organizations who often have big teams managing their financial information, and they maybe have a 2 or 3 people managing their entire sustainability program. And if that small sustainability team is expected to pick up the whole realm of all other impacts, all other interactions with the capitals or with these broader group of stakeholders, then that is that can seem like a pretty daunting challenge. I think two points on this. Firstly, I think the right approaches are very, very much focused on materiality. So the concept borrowed from the accounting world, like many of the concepts that we've all found resonate best with companies. Materiality of environmental and social impact, and often it's possible to measure that relative to other impact areas. So to identify what are the most material impact areas, or it can also be meaningful to look at that relative to the financial performance of the company. So how does a monetized environmental or social impact compare to its EBITDA, or its profits or its revenue? First observation. Second, that you must, and a few of us referenced this, look along the whole value chain if you're interested in long-term value creation and equally long-term risk to business models. So again, that you know, it is outside the comfort zone of a lot of organizations who prefer to operate in the sort of sphere that they legally control. But actually, in practice, you know, if you're an automotive firm, for example, and you look only at your own direct emissions and use of resources, then you miss the sort of glaring fact that it is in the use of your product that most of the impacts are created, and that is the area as a conventional ICE, internal combustion engine automotive, that you need to be focused. Mm-hmm. The materiality and along the whole value chain. And then I mentioned a phrase before, enough precision for the decision. So really understanding what you're going to use the information for as a way of informing how much novel data, for example, needs to be gathered. Now, I think in the early days of projects in this sphere, I mean, when I think back, Adrian mentioned the work we did with Puma nearly 10 years ago now. We didn't have such a good handle at that point on what defined materiality and what data to really go after to understand differences in organizational impacts along the value chain. Now we have such better insight into that very often it's possible to quantify material impacts, do that initial quantification with almost no additional data input, to use desktop models and the like, and well-developed methodologies to make those preliminary assessments that really identify the strategically important areas that you need to go after additional data.
Okay, thank you. Adrian?
Yeah, so I think, to be honest, it is true that this is challenging for businesses to wrap their heads around to. I think first, it is genuinely more complex and new. So you're adding dimensions to a business. And as Will says, another one is data. Data is challenging. Data of your own company about the employee satisfaction, but also data on the entire value chain. And in particular, if you want to manage, you need something more granular. You need to know what is the difference of my decisions. We also know that a third challenge is the competence set. And not only the measurement, but also now I have to manage. I'm educated to manage profits or risks. And now I have to also, in addition to that, I also have to manage all kind of other societal interests. And that just requires an additional competence set. And people are not trained for that. And finally, we see a strategic challenge, because if you take this information seriously, it may mean you have to quite drastically do things differently. And that's not so easy. So going from that information, absorbing that and translating that to a strategy, that can be challenging. So a few ways to make it easier is first recognize that it's a journey, so that you don't have to do everything at once. Start with things that give value in the short term, create energy, create understanding. So recognize that, and also the path of each company is different. Second, make life easier with data. So we have a global impact database that you can say, well, I have this dollar in this sector, in this country, and then on average that creates this of environmental impact, social impact, human impact, etc. So you have to refine that, but you start somewhere. And finally, very important, work with the why. So why are we doing that? So we don't work with companies that don't want to create a better world and that don't believe that they can build a business case around that, because we think that won't work, right? You won't want to put the effort, you won't give those benefits. And working from the C-suite until the analyst level, why do we want to do this as a company? Because that makes the rest much more natural and it will flow. And without that, you can start a pilot or two pilots, but then it won't, it won't generate those benefits.
Okay, thank you. For the participants, I am aware that I see many chats and some people raise their hand. So after when Martin answered this question, I will ask Carolina and Jan to summarize a few questions for the participants. They are very active, I see. So, but first to you, Martin. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Ivo. So I'll maybe already put a link to some of the questions that I see passing, because some question passing on SDGs and GRI. Actually, I would say the business leaders that I meet, or our clients, are typically full of ambition, but do not necessarily know how to go forward, how to capture more value, societal value. Because they see SDGs, they see GRI coming by. What does it mean? What does it mean for me? And I would say reporting is of course key, but strategy is what dictates. Because just reporting, like certainly once we're speaking about non-financial reports, it's very easy to put on some things like, okay, we put solar panels on the roof, etc. But you know it's hollow. The people reading it know it's hollow. Your employees know it's hollow. So it does not really generate value. It doesn't really. There's no personification. There's nothing which adds value there. So strategy is key, and defining exactly like this materiality part. What is material for me? Not just out of our impact, but also in line with our priorities. And I think that's where the exercise really starts, making explicit what you as a company want to stand for. And once you've got this strategy around sustainability under all kinds of externalities that you bring to society, once you've clear where you want to stand for, then the whole reporting part will become clear. And things like SDG can help to determine your priorities. And it's kind of a framework that helps to think.
Okay. Thank you. But just briefly, the traditional reporting, like for accounting, is the typical reporting in the financial statement is and the quarterly is coming from the financial department. They have the accounting stuff, right? Do you see also there a difference?
Well, I think we come back to the metrics. I would say in the accounting department, all the metrics are logic and very mature. You've got automated KPI dashboards. I mean, everything goes through SAP. SAP reports it automatically. Certainly, if you're going to look at sustainability, this is not the case. SAP can report on CO2 emissions, but very few companies have these automated dashboards already. But I think more and more we are now going to integrated reports, where you've got both the financial and the non-financial statistics of a company in one report. It's also linked with highlighting how much value you create. So these integrated reports, that's a logical evolution, but your system behind it, your governance part has to be ready. If you're not collecting the data, it will be very hard to report it at the same quality level as you're reporting your financials.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm looking to Carolina and Jan. I'm sure you see, I see many chats, so maybe you could define a few questions from the audience.
Yes, so we received a number of questions when participants first registered to this webinar, many of which have been already answered by the panelists. But the key main themes that were raised were, of course, how to compare between the different methodologies, so the difference and similarities, and how we could get those methodologies more aligned, and in particular also how to create incentive systems for collaboration. Another topic that emerged was holistic and integrated approaches to value creation. So how to integrate financial and non-financial reporting by value added statements. And lastly, of course, there were a number of questions about the COVID-19 situation, whether this health and economic crisis could potentially lead to a sustainability reawakening. And there were questions around how to ensure focus on managing sustainability given current global factors affecting the business adversely, at least in the short term. So this is where the key main themes from the questions that we received at the beginning. I think what is interesting right now for the chat were references to how all of this right now relates to the SDGs. What is the role and importance of the global reporting initiative? And then there were a few questions regarding each of the models. How do they apply to different kind of corporations and financial institutions?
Okay, thank you. Will, could you
pick up a few of those?
Yeah, yeah.
Glad to. So first on the SDG point, there was a question about what are the KPIs. There's a great many possible KPIs, both under the SDGs and that companies have used to measure their impact against the SDGs. So I won't list them, but I could point you to a thing online. If you Google the SDG reporting challenge, it has lots of information on what kind of reporting companies are doing against the SDGs. And I was just looking at it myself. 50% of companies have selected priority SDGs. 19% of CEOs or chair statements mention the SDGs. 27% say that they have embedded SDGs into business strategy. And according to this, 23% of companies disclosed meaningful KPIs and targets related to the SDGs. So I found that interesting. On the relevance of GRI, I mean, it's been a reference and a sort of benchmark for many of us in the space for a very long time. And I think it's a remarkable endeavor. As an indication of its influence, there was a project for the World Economic Forum, which all of the big four firms were involved in. And I was fortunate to be asked to lead the Planet workstream of that effort. It's been called Towards Common Metrics on Sustainable Value Creation. And it was a project for the International Business Council of the Forum. And in that document, we recommend a very, very pared down number of metrics across the 4 Ps of planet, prosperity, principles of governance, and people. And of those metrics that we ended up recommending, about 70% were drawn from or slightly adapted from metrics that exist in the GRI. So that's a measure of how influential it is. I think the challenge with GRI, and in some ways, one of the challenges with the SDGs, is that it is so comprehensive that it risks being sort of everything and at the same time nothing. And I think the point that we would make from the context of companies is that to address impacts on society and the environment in a serious and focused way, you need a very strong lens on the materiality of those impacts, which is, so that focus is kind of key. I would just make one other comment on the COVID-19 point, which I think is really interesting. One of the things, for those of us who've been in this industry long enough to have been working in sustainability consulting through the financial crisis, we saw a lot of projects halted and the whole space, practically dry up in 2008-9. It's been completely different this time around. I can say pretty confidently. So sure, businesses that have been completely hammered by COVID-19 have pulled back on projects, but many that have been less severely affected have even, some have even accelerated projects, especially where those projects have a direct line into organizational purpose. So where it's sustainability, environmental and social feeding into organizational purpose, we see quite a few organizations right now looking very hard at how their purpose as an organization positions them to support the recovery post COVID-19 and to manage their actions during the crisis.
Okay. Thank you, Will. Adrian, could you comment on a few questions?
Sure. So let me also start with the SDGs. So in 2013, we heard that the UN was starting with the successors of the MDGs. So we said it is crucial that business is involved in this new set of targets. And so we gathered businesses in the Netherlands to give input, and we're part of the formal consultation. So I have some insight in how they were formed, and they were really formed as global targets, global goals. So as such, they're not made as being a measurement framework for businesses. They're goals, they're formulated on a global level. So countries already have trouble translating that to the country level. And then alone, it's very difficult to translate that back to the company level. So what we suggest is a different approach. So you have, those are goals. What you can do is you have your impact, and that's something you can systematically measure and value. And then you can map that on the SDGs. So you can show how much did I contribute as a company to the SDGs. So we have seen that as a more fruitful approach, because otherwise you come in a big pile of problems, because the SDGs are just not a measurement framework, and they were never intended to be such. Second, on the harmonization, so it is hard work. You have the ones that Will have mentioned. You also have the impact management project across the world. You have the impact weight accounts by Harvard. So what we think is important is to make it pre-competitive. So also for that, we have funded the Impact Economy Foundation. So we said, well, if you develop that and we're a company, it has to be in the commons, open source. The chair is actually a previous chair of the Global Reporting Initiative. And he said that you need a pre-competitive, stakeholder inclusive approach to get something through. So I think that is, but it will be hard work. And finally, I think the COVID -19 is, in my opinion, the most interesting. So from my perspective, it has shown how bad the current economy is at how good it is at creating crises. Because if you think about COVID, it is a zoonosis. So it is something man-made. It has been predicted. There have been UN reports saying, well, this is an externality zoonosis, we have to manage it. It was in one of our reports in 2014, but people said, oh, that is too complex. And so it's really a creation of our global economy. So I think it shows that you need to change the way the economy works in order to solve this. Otherwise, it will be exceedingly expensive. Mm-hmm. So actually, we see it as a very important argument for a case that you have to move beyond an economy that doesn't measure and price the impacts and risks is imposed on society.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I agree. I agree with you. Martin, do you have a few comments?
Yes, I'll take one specific question. The question is about the fact that the different methodologies presented really focus on companies and that the wording is company specific. Mm-hmm. And the question continues with, what about overall society? Well, I think there are two perspectives that are important. And one is, I would say, the societal perspective, the policy perspective, where you look at a measure, an action, and you look at the total societal impacts. I would say that methodology framework is very well known. It's called environmental economics. It's called externalities. If you take an action, you know what it does, and you have positive and negative externalities that are not necessarily taken into account by the person deciding the action. So in itself, the decision is kind of easy. You can also implement it to companies, and then you get to like a microeconomic level. The problem is that it's kind of academic in nature. You go to like this concept of externalities, although it's very straightforward and it works and it's generally established, it still remains kind of academic, and it's not so easy to apply to a single company. So the question was, why are these methodologies focused so hard on companies? Well, I would say because on the societal perspective, the methodology is accepted and well known, just working with economics, macroeconomics, microeconomics, and externalities. The question is, what can you do with it, knowing that companies have a huge impact on society, they have externalities. The question is, how can they steer this? How can they quantify this? How can they make this grow, the positive side of the externalities? I think the three methodologies presented here all focus on companies, because that's where there's the biggest feel of lacking methodologies. Companies want to do something, but they don't know how, they don't know what to report. Well, that's what these methodologies, and I'll speak for myself here for the long-term value framework, that's what we try to bring to people, methodology to help them measure and decide how to become more sustainable or better for society.
Okay. Thank you, Martin. We have 4 minutes. I see. I have the feeling that we could talk the whole day about this, and then even then, many questions will be left. But I also feel that having you together in this panel as really outstanding panelists, we need to continue this discussion also to create more action for the future, because I think we all combine things together, and I'm pretty sure that we will continue this discussion, and also together with Antwerp Management School to somehow to follow up the discussion. Also the first panel, I think it's really worth to do this, and I think it's for our participants extremely important, and I can imagine that also lessons learned from you three, and to share the ideas and your insights among the panelists could be very interesting. So I'm pretty sure. So I want to thank you really for your contribution and your really inspiring words and sharing your ideas. Really, thank you. I want also to thank the participants for their chats, for their ideas, for the questions. And I see that Wayne is also online, so I would like to also to invite Wayne. Can you make yourself visible?
Sure.
Yes, he is there. I think it's nice to close this event. From my side, I would like to close it and thank you and your colleagues, and thank my colleagues from ABIS for our joint journey, what we did the last month to organize this and to invite our very, very inspiring panelists. So thank you for that. And I would
think
say
it was the first, but it won't be the last. I mean, my feeling
yeah,
from both sessions
exactly.
that we've just
yes,
scratched the surface, and it's a very ripe area to go even deeper. So I hope everyone feels that way, and
yeah,
we will we'll try to do some more.
okay. And well, maybe from my last thing from my side, stay all participants and all you take care, stay healthy,